and welcome to today's webcast. Before we start, let me introduce myself. My name is Deepika Bhatt, and I'm a senior data and analytics consultant with Thorogood Associates based in London. I also have with me today my colleague Liz McCreesh, and we will be presenting today's session on building flexibility in supply chain planning. Our contact details are on the screen should you want to reach out about any of the content that we discussed today. So starting with the agenda, for today's webcast, I'll start with first a quick introduction to Thorogood, then move on to an overview of supply chain management and the need for flexibility in planning. I'll take that overview as a basis to discuss ways in which you can define a data strategy for an integrated supply chain. Then Liz will walk us through a sample use case and wrap up with some key considerations. For those who don't know Thorogood, we are an independent global professional services firm specializing in business intelligence and analytics strategies, solutions, and services with a focus on our customers. We are a global company with offices in Asia, Europe, and the Americas. We offer a full range of data and analytics services, including strategy and roadmaps, design, implementation, data analysis, and training and support as well. Our clients typically span 4 data-rich verticals, that is consumer goods, pharmaceutical and health services, banking, and insurance. We work cross-functionally across a wide array of business units with our customers, where supply chain happens to be one of our major focus areas. The work we've done within the supply chain space spans from S&OP and demand planning to recipe management and sustainability. In terms of the technologies that we work with, we are an independent consulting firm, meaning that we don't work with any one specific technology. We do, however, work and partner with many of the key players in the market in order to provide our clients with the solution that best suits their needs, some of which you can see on the screen here. So let's first start with an overview of supply chain management. A common supply chain may look something like this: raw materials that are initially grown or created, procured and shipped to a supplier. A supplier then takes those materials and begins the manufacturing process, creating finally your end products and packaging them accordingly. Once the packaged goods are ready and can be transported, they are distributed to the customer, whether that's direct to a retailer or a third-party distributor. Your products then eventually will end up on shelves of the retailer, available for purchase by your end consumers. So when we look at it in this high-level manner, you can see that this seems all fairly simple. But with that said, how does an organization plan for optimization of their supply chain? So simply put, if we think about the upstream steps of the process, that is identifying and purchasing of raw materials, creating the product, packaging the product, and distributing it out to your retailers, all of this costs money, and the organizations are obviously looking to decrease those costs. Between the supplier through to the lead retailer, there's quite a bit of activity in relationship building, whether it's via promotions or offering discounts, but all that's backed by the data. And finally, once your product is available to the consumer, you want to obviously increase the sales, whether it's by volume or, again, by a price comparison. Overall, again, when we look at it, the goals are quite simple, right? But it is definitely not that simple, especially with the uncertainty of the current global environment. With constantly changing factors like the COVID crisis, focus on sustainability, changing political climate, spotting how these external factors impact your supply chain has become critical for business continuity these days. So some of the common challenges that we are seeing at our customers, and you might yourselves have faced, is thinking about from the very left-hand side, how am I sourcing my raw materials? Am I sourcing them sustainability? Thinking of sustainability in mind, as you might have already heard, sustainability is currently a big trend in the industry. And as of late, no organization wants to be left behind. And when you think about how do you source data for such reporting, you often need to do a bit of experimentation with different data sources, which often is Excel spreadsheets to start with. Once you start bringing in the material, there are other things that you might need to think about. Do you have enough supply of raw materials to produce the planned amount? And is the supply of those raw materials affected by any, climate-related issues or due to any border regulations that might come into picture, like the Brexit regulations, for example? Similarly, if there's a sudden demand for a specific product, so like we had for toilet papers or hand sanitizers during the COVID pandemic, you need to think about, am I making of enough product to fulfill this sudden change in demand? And similar to that, there are a couple of other examples following that suit. So these are just some common questions and pain points for each of the steps of the process, obviously not capturing the whole picture, but some of the key pain points. So there is a need for an end-to-end view of the supply chain in a single platform that can allow the users to have all the right information they need to take these decisions. Often the hardest part in designing a solution is that how can you design something which can fit both trusted and tactical data sets together while still adhering to a standard enterprise architecture. So how can you start defining a strategy for this? On the screen are some of the key factors that you need to consider when defining your data strategy. So out of all of these, data sourcing obviously being a key one. While we won't be going into detail for all of these factors today, hopefully this gives you a good starting point to take away and think about in more detail as you exit this webcast. For now, let me give you a head start on how does the tactical data sourcing fit into all of this. From a data sourcing perspective, to answer the business questions that we were looking at a couple of slides ago, you often need to look at both trusted and tactical data sources. Many supply chain systems will take ERP data, likely from SAP. Sales data can often be found in CRM databases of some kind, Salesforce, for example, and any reference or master data will also be very crucial in ensuring your data lake data is being viewed and categorized in the correct way. These data sets, some of these data sets might already be available to you in an enterprise data lake. But when you think about some of the tactical data sources, for example, I've given a few examples here. For example, if you want to look at CO2 emissions for identifying, how sustainable is your supply chain, these data sets are fairly new and might not be as structured or might not be as easy to automate. Logistics, setting of targets based on the changing climate, and also things like social media sentiment can be quite critical to assess and combine with your internal data. So when we are defining a strategy, the key thing that comes to mind is we need some sort of agility in our architecture. So when we look at this diagram, we are looking at all the data sources at the bottom, whether it's trusted data sources like SAP or tactical data sources that we are still exploring. When we come to the middle layer, where we are actually ingesting the data, storing the data, and transforming it as per our need, it can be classified into three different sets, starting from right-hand side this time. So when we think about ad hoc data sets, we're talking about some of these tactical data sets we are not really sure about whether we need them or not. We want to just bring them in, assess whether they're useful for our use case, and if they are indeed useful, we would want to put some guardrails around them and start working with them. That's how you move on to the next part. So looking at the middle box, which is talks about the agility. So once you've done initial proof of concepts and you think that this data is going to be valuable for you, you can move to a more agile data set in the middle. So this data set is still flexible. You can continue bringing in some additional columns as and when you need, put some processes around it in terms of how it can be refreshed. But still, you're not completely sure how easy would it be to automate, and there still might be some manual checks required to ensure that the data quality is up to standard. But finally, if you've got the buy-in from your users of this data, you might want to invest a little bit more time and money into making them more managed sources. So this talks about ensuring that these data sets are now robust, they are stable enough, they are being refreshed automatically, and there's little to no manual intervention required at this point. And finally, ensuring that whether it's an ad hoc data set, it's an agile data set, or whether it's a managed data set, you want to ensure that you can continuously do some reporting or analytics on it so that you're able to prove value and continue moving forward with taking decisions without thinking too much about how that data is stored within your data lake. Looking at a sample architecture within Azure, I'm just taking one example of a standard lakehouse architecture that we have seen and used across customers, where on the left-hand side, we are looking at all our data sources. In the middle, the data storage part, or what we call the data lake. And on the right-hand side, the different reporting tools or analytics tool that you might be using to consume this data. So in the standard architecture, often organizations will have a lot of guardrails placed, and they will often ask you to only bring in data that is trusted, do a lot of work to ensure that it matches the structure that is expected as a part of the standard approach. What we're talking about here in terms of introducing an agility to this architecture is when you have some tactical data sources, whether they are Excel files coming from other data types that are not as a standard easy to consume, what you want to do is probably divide your data lake into separate areas. One area for your trusted data sets, which when anyone goes into the data lake and explores, they know that this has proper quality checks, it's managed, and they can trust it to build and share with users across the organization. When they go into the data lake area, which is tagged as tactical, obviously that's not the name you might want to use. You can call it technical debt or a few other names. What you want to ensure is there's a clear classification of what can and cannot be used for organization-wide reporting. Once you are comfortable with the tactical data sets moving through that path of agile and managed, you can start moving them into the trusted part of the data lake and continuously evolve it. Just a prompt, I know we haven't spoken a lot about what the lakehouse architecture and the individual components are. We do have pre-recorded content, so if you'd like to know more in detail about what are the different components of the lakehouse architecture, do look at our webcast that is already published on our perspectives page. The similar architecture can also be followed. This is not just for the Azure or Microsoft-based cloud, but also in AWS and GCP. Overall, tying up this data set is not losing the sight of the larger roadmap. The path to industrialization is overall key. So there might be some experiments that and proof of concepts that you might end up thrown away in the end. But the power of this agile strategy will definitely also result in success stories that are worth the investment and can be expanded and industrialized quickly because they are designed within the enterprise framework rather than in a silo. So when we look at this overall from tactical, how do you go from tactical to productionized solution? You might have to start within your small business teams. That's what we call the exploratory stage, where you take the data, explore the data, and ensure that you have something that might be worth value or a return on investment to you. That's when you move on to the second stage, where you expand that and start sharing that data set with a wider user group so that they can test and certify it. And when you're happy with that, you can start working towards stabilizing this, and ultimately the industrialized solution can then be IT managed with little to no intervention required from the individual business teams. With that, I will hand over to Liz for the next section.
Okay, so what I'm going to talk about briefly is I'm going to show through a little example of supply chain reporting. Obviously, as Deepika has mentioned, to do that, we will be pulling in some of our enterprise data or more trusted data. So that could be things like your inventory, production volumes, customer service. Linking closely with that will be our master data, which will be our globally maintained set of data. Some example attributes here could be product, factory, customer, and time. And then to supplement that, we will also have some tactical data, and that could be where sources are more new. So we've mentioned some of the environmental data around sustainability. It could be some sources where you don't have enterprise level data, so safety data, quality data. If you want to include new attributes that aren't in your master data yet, this can be a good way to start pulling them in and seeing if there's any business value with incorporating them into a more robust solution. So as Deepika was saying, if you want to get that agility, pull something in, see if it's adding any value. I know a project I'm working on at the minute, we're bringing in some new product attributes, see whether products are vegan or whether the sourcing of ingredients, whether they're PETA approved. So things like that you mightn't have currently built into your enterprise system, but you're looking to add more value and bring more attributes into the system. Tactical data is a good way to do that. Once you've got all of that data together, you're going to need to combine it. So here's where you need to look at that master data, because that's going to be the glue that hangs it all together. Are you able to map directly, especially with your tactical data sets? Quite often they won't have any codes for you to map and link the data to. They quite often will just have descriptions. So let's say in your master data for country, maybe you've got USA, but your data provider gives you United States. You'll need to create a bridging or mapping table that allows the data to understand that United States should get mapped to the USA. And then that way the data will flow through and be able to be combined together. And then once you've built that model, you've got all of your data in the one place. So then you can start looking at reporting and your end-to-end supply chain and looking at those metrics that allow you to monitor your business. So here we've got a little demonstration. Over the course of the supply chain, we've pulled out some indicators that we think represent the health of the supply chain. We've included some target information. So we've used a RAG status to say whether something's good compared to target, or red, or amber. We've also called out some of the indicators that we're particularly interested in. This is a flexible setup on this particular dashboard, so I can choose which of the KPIs I particularly want to see. So I've pulled out some of them: forecast accuracy, days on hand for my inventory, dispatch rate for service, and plastic reduction for the environment. There's nothing in here to indicate whether these are being sourced tactically or from our enterprise environment. From an end user point of view, we just see them all, the KPIs here. In our glossary, we might want to indicate whether, where the data is being sourced from. I think it's just useful to be aware of that. It's a good way of getting in information. And also, if you haven't got all of the bits and pieces available from day one, start building out what you can and have those placeholders in so that you can continue to build and extend your dashboard. If I do want to see a little bit more information, I can do a quick hover and I can see a bit more of a breakdown for my forecast accuracy with some of the trends and the brands. But what that allows me to do by using something like the hover report, I'm still in the mindset of looking at my overall health of my supply chain, but it allows me to see a little bit more detail without losing my train of thought. If I do, however, wish to go and do more of a deep dive, we can link through to relevant reports which have got a more granular set of data. So here I can now see information by customer, which I did not have in my summary view, because a lot of those KPIs, customer does not make sense. So our summary view just has those high level filters of category, market and location, because those are relevant for all of the KPIs throughout my supply chain. So just a couple of things to think about when you're pulling in data from multiple sources. So mapping to the dimensions, I've mentioned that already, but I think that's a key point. And for things like we're saying, where some of the mappings might be on descriptions, you need to think about ongoing maintenance. How do you flag and make it visible that there's data that's come in that's not being mapped somewhere, so you're not losing any information? Think about the granularity of the data that you're getting as well. So you may have some KPIs coming in at a daily refresh. You might have things done at SKU level. You might have other information that's only by category level. So maybe your targets and plans aren't at the same granularity as your actuals. You need to think about where you want to combine that data together. If there are calculations that require things at different levels, when does it make sense to use it and when does it not? How frequently are you getting your KPIs refreshed? So if you're getting data daily, weekly, monthly, how do you respond to that and how do you display that on the screen so it's clear to your end users what the data is they're looking at? Data quality, how do you monitor that and make sure that you're not loading garbage in and garbage out? Where you're having files, if someone's having to maintain them manually and pulling data from different places and literally pasting it into Excel, it's very easy to do a manual mistake. So having data quality reports, which will flag if there is data that was there last month for a certain attribute but isn't there this month, if there's a large percentage variance between this month's data and last month's, anything like this that will help you see where you could have potential gaps in your data. Very important thing is definition. So depending on the audience of your dashboard, you need to ensure that everyone understands the same meaning of your KPI. Again, I mentioned having a glossary earlier. I think having that available is very important to ensure that we are talking apples and apples and not mixing up our metaphors. And you need to think about if the restatement of history, rather than loading as one file for the whole month, do you need to have an entire year so that any restatements that happen in the source is actually taken care of and your data is matching. So when you're comparing your summary level dashboards, that they match with the more detailed reports that other people will be using. So just to summarize again, looking at that data you're going to be pulling in, you need to think not just about your standard data sources, but where you can get tactical data in to add more insights. I've recently worked on a project a few months ago where of our KPIs for our supply chain reporting, I think about 40% of them were coming from tactical sources. And I'd say about half of those, there was a plan in place to pull that into a more centralized area. But there was acceptance of certain KPIs that you're never going to have a productionized system for. And that will, for the foreseeable future, continue to be tactical. Again, the idea of this throwing away if it's not beneficial, I don't know whether these vegan attributes will be useful for reporting, but we'll load them in tactically for now. And if there is a business benefit and more teams would like to have that included, then we would look to include that in our trusted set of data in our data lake. So that was all we were going to cover today. Just to let you know, we do a lot of different events and we've got experience across many different areas. So if you do need any help in any of these areas, we'd be very interested to speak to you about that. So please feel free to reach out. And if you do have any questions for either Deepika or myself, here's our contact details and please feel free to reach out.